Hello and welcome to the War Report, and happy Pride Month because we know this is just our favorite. We are the flagship program of Global Homo, and we're going to celebrate the proper way. So let's start out by saying what our wonderful president had to say about this wondrous event. Just to get us started. President Donald J. Trump says, quote, as we celebrate LGBT Pride Month and recognize the outstanding contributions of the LGBT people have made to our great nation, let us also stand in solidarity with the many LGBT people who live in dozens of countries worldwide that punish, imprison, or even execute individuals on the basis of their sexual orientation. My administration has launched a global campaign to decriminalize homosexuality and invite all nations to join us in this effort! Exclamation point.
Exclamation.
Which is absolutely ridiculous to say because the number 2 ally of the United States in the Middle East is Saudi Arabia. And so for the United States to make a proclamation to decriminalize homosexuality worldwide, they're going to have to deal with a lot of their allies. You know, if they're going to look at their enemies for as a potential target, you're only really looking at Iran. Sometimes they try to claim Russia is like this homophobic country.
Yeah,
but
Russia
I really
is
don't.
pretty much like just don't show it in the media. We don't care what you do in your bedroom. That's pretty much the extent of the Russian laws.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's as bad as they're claiming it to be. And so the reality of the situation is, outside of Iran, World War Ghey would take place on primarily U.S. allies.
I don't know. What's the situation in China? Like, they might try to hammer them with that, saying, Xi's mean to the Muslims and the gays. I mean, they'll probably run with that.
Well, yeah, maybe China too, because today, I don't know if you guys heard, but the U.S. will be selling $2 billion in weapons to Taiwan. And so obviously that's going to piss China off. So I don't know if it's because of China's gay policies, but there's clear an antagonism with China. But will it amount to any physical fighting? I think that the economic relationship is just too powerful.
Oh, yeah. Like I said this actually, I believe, back in September, that pretty much, look, there may be a conflict with China in the future. It would probably be very asymmetrical, very fourth-generation warfare style thing. But it's not going to happen for many decades because we are so economically intertwined. Even with what Trump's doing right now with the scary trade war, it's still not nearly scratching the surface of how tied together our economies are.
Yeah, when Nixon went to China, I mean, he basically merged the two economies forever. And so unless there's a huge economic shift, I don't know how we'll ever be in a fully antagonistic position with China, especially when Walmart is just full of Chinese plastic products.
Well, I mean, to that end, it looks like Putin, the accelerationist, of course, he had Jinping over, and there's even talks about having some Chinese manufacturing begin to shift to Russia. Because China is now at a point where it's actually manufacturing a lot of goods for its own market and for the Far East.
So what's going to happen is Russia's going to manufacture the goods, and then China's going to sell them to us, making our sanctions pointless.
And they're going to do it through a polar passage. So, yeah, I mean, I would say that is going to be one of the consequences, is that China will have to look elsewhere for manufacturing, just like America is looking elsewhere for manufacturing. Neither of the parties are ready to cut the cord in a drastic way just yet.
But beyond that, let's focus on the really important thing, the LGBTQ CIA community.
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous. And also, if you think about it just from like a constitutional foreign policy perspective, homophobia isn't a threat to like the mainland of the U.S. We're not even like this is more abstract than declaring war on terrorism, because like at least with terrorists, you're identifying like, albeit it's amorphous and abstract, but you're identifying like a violent person, violent, hostile. But by this whole World War Gay decriminalized, homosexuality worldwide, you're not really identifying a clear enemy. So this is just like the infinite possibilities of an eternal war on terror, just times 10.
Yeah, I mean, there's been several essays written about the influence of, say, gay culture and other aspects of atomized Western lifestyles that basically support capitalism right now. You can see when that shift started to take place with Reagan, when capitalism started to move towards attracting the individual not being just a father or a mother, but an individual first and foremost.
Yes. And I will say this also. To people calling this so absurd, like, I understand, like, yeah, it's absurd in concept, but people who think it's absurd, the fact that, like, oh, we're never going to do that, keep in mind, we've been funding pride parades in Ukraine since pretty much the fall of the Soviet Union. The UK's been doing it in Poland. We've been doing it all over the place. It's been happening, but now it's just a visual policy. We talked about this back in February, but again, now
they take this very seriously. Yeah, this is a very serious matter. Like, this is not, they don't take this lightly, even if we do, because it's an important process of creating this atomized society, right? To celebrate the homosexual, because that essentially what that does is these countries that are tough nuts to crack, as it were, they have a history of being vertical powers, very hierarchical, and an atomized population, a population that believes that the government is simply there to serve them. Also, having a business sector that promotes these sorts of values, but in return is not criticized, which is essentially what happened in the West, especially the last 19 years. It is a strategy. It works for the West on a financial level, and I would say the 90s and early 2000s was about spreading as many McDonald's around the world, and I would say in the 2020s it really will be about spreading as many rainbow flags around the world.
I mean, we're gonna crack that nut. Moscow canceled the Pride Parade for the 17th year in a row now. Next year will be the year. The rainbow flag will be above Red Square next year. So help me.
You know what? That reminds me of the old McDonaldization theory before the whole Syrian war. We've talked about this before. How
yes.
The theory in college campuses was that if a country has McDonald's, if two countries have a McDonald's, they're not going to go to war against each other. This was essentially like the end of history argument. But it seems like this is now the golden arches are being changed with the gay flag, in the sense that maybe there is this sort of metric that if there are two openly gay countries, they're probably not going to fight against each other.
Guys, let's avoid war. Gay people could get hurt.
Alternatively, you remember in World War I, the Germans, the British, they stopped fighting each other on Christmas Day. See, it's going to come to the point where they're going to stop fighting each other during Pride Month.
Yeah. It's true, though.
The Pride Month ceasefire.
That is the history we have to avoid.
Cleansing fire, come down.
Now you were saying,
but let's move.
Yeah, you were saying you had a detailed account of how the U.S. could use all these international institutions to actually try to implement this. Now, if you want to go a little bit into that, let's do that.
I didn't get a chance to do enough research into it. I wanted to see maybe is there a way that the Trump admin could maybe leverage the criminal courts, because if you want to talk about this more realistically, how the U.S. leverages a lot of countries to change these sort of policies, it is through the international criminal court systems, where if they're not going to, wage war on you or sanction you, they'll target specific individuals within regimes
Hmm.
and try to charge them essentially with like Geneva violations or I don't know if you guys ever watched The Office, but there's this funny joke where Dwight Schrute says like, "Oh well, you have rights because a town in Switzerland says you do," but it's like kind of like a similar concept. Like they can prosecute anyone based on these sort of obscure laws that they don't even really follow. I mean, the United States has been documented in taking place in torture programs, for instance, so which clearly violate the Geneva Convention. So it's clear that like these it can be applied to only hostile individuals. So
Oh, of
that was,
course.
but that's sort of a hypothetical that we should just hope never happens.
Now,
But
now, move.
go.
Yeah,
Yeah,
moving on.
let's go on to other like CIA backed programs. So here's a State Department program that was that was occurring within the U.S. And what it was is that a bunch of Persian journalists on Twitter discovered that a Twitter account by the name of Iran Disinfo, which is a terrible name. Let's like just like
That's a
like
boomer.
basic optics. Like you're
Ron
telling
Dissing.
people this is disinfo, right? This is Iran disinformation. So like automatically just pure like optics, aesthetics. It's a bad approach because no one's going to believe what you're saying in the first place. But aside from that, what happened was that there was a lot of tweets between this Iran disinfo account, uh, a FDD fellow named Mark Dubowitz, who's we can get into him a little bit later, and this other like weird Persian cat lady who's like some literally like a 60, 70-year-old cat lady. So the thing was that the three of their tweets were like basically identical, almost like bot like, and it turned out that the cat lady was like a State Department, had some State Department contracts in which she was essentially being paid US taxpayer money to run this really shitty Twitter account called Iran Disinfo, in which they pretty much just tweeted just outright lies about what was going on. Like it was literally fake news, is what
Hmm.
it was.
Well, I for one
Interesting.
applaud. I for one applaud the stand for women's empowerment.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was a lot of that kind of stuff. A lot of those tweets, though. It was a lot of job protest tweets. There was a link to like apparently an Iranian Infowars, which is linked to the real Infowars. So apparently, Infowars is getting help by the State Department to find a market in Iran. But meanwhile, Alex Jones is getting deplatformed in America. Isn't this
The guy can't win.
well, you know what? This is probably a deal he took because he's getting
Yeah, of course.
some Iranian followers or something. I don't know. It's really weird, but basically, a bunch of these journalists discovered that this was going on, and the worst part is like, we don't know how much of our tax dollars were going into this. This is money that could be much better spent than giving to like some cat ladies and to make a Twitter account. But obviously, I mean, my guess would be it was somewhere under $1 million, which isn't a lot. But this is just one of the programs that actually got outed. If you think about it in that respect, and so and it was interesting because this outing coincided with and I don't know if you guys heard about this, but George Nader, he was an individual on the Trump transition team, and he was a witness in the Mueller probe. He was charged with trafficking child pornography. Now, these
Whoa.
two events happened basically around the same time. They're unrelated, but the reason why it's significant to point out is because George Nader is actually a really important individual. He's a really wealthy businessman who, I mean, his name pops up nowadays in the news because of he was involved in Robert Mueller's investigation. But the key about Nader is that he's been a DC elite. for many years, many decades. And his main shtick is he's sort of like this foreign lobbying merc, where countries, whether Qatar, Dubai, or what have you, basically pay him to lobby on their behalf. And so one of the programs that George Nader was working on and funding before he got caught with the child porn was Mark Dubowitz and the FDD, who were working with
Wow.
Iran disinfo. So what you have is this really weird link between a child porn trafficker, a Persian cat lady, Mark Dubowitz in the State Department, just basically running this like disinfo Iran, literally named Iran disinfo Twitter program. And so we're talking about big money, a lot of money involved in this, and a lot of nothing came out of it. And so, I mean, obviously, no one bought it. And what was key was that that account was consistently attacking a lot of other Persian journalists who were refusing to support the war. And so it was a win for those journalists, I guess, if you see it in that light, that they were able to show that many of their critics were actually the U.S. State Department.
Pathetic.
So
With a guy that believes love has no age.
yeah, exactly. It's just this really bizarre link. So
Quote unquote bizarre.
yeah, I mean, now you officially the pro-war. So it's funny because the Javad Zarif, the Iranian foreign minister, he calls Trump's admin the B team. Like Pompeo, Bolton, because these weren't the actual DC elites that should be waging war on him in the sense like Bush or the Clintons or the Obamas, like their admins were the A team, so to speak. So he calls the Trump admin the B team, but now you see that there's this like even more pathetic C tier team that's just going on between like a child porn. And here's the thing about George Nader: he has been convicted on child porn before, so this isn't slander or defamation. This is true. He was convicted on this offense, and he was arrested again for this offense. So this, and in between this time, while he was a known, a convicted pedophile, he was funding various groups on around DC. He was welcomed in many parties and meetings and giving presentations. So, this the inner circle of the pro-war camp is just extremely stupid, extremely just gross.
They bought
And
into their own lies. It's hilarious. It's kind of sad too.
Absolutely.
Too many pizza parties.
Oh, of course. Bringing that old nut up. But speaking of Iran, let's move on to some of Pompeo's comments. So, during a visit to Switzerland on Sunday, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo said that the U.S. is prepared to engage in negotiations with Iran without any preconditions about its nuclear program, but he said he needs to see Iran, quote, start acting like a normal nation. Now, Iran dismissed this as wordplay. Now, Pompeo, when asked about Rouhani's comments the day before, that Iran might be willing to hold talks if Washington showed respect, Pompeo replied, quote, "We are prepared to engage in conversation with no preconditions. We're ready to sit down." End quote. He also said that Washington would, quote, reverse the malign activity of, and of course he was referencing Iranian support for Assad and Hezbollah and whatever. Now, Rouhani said in response to that it was up to the United States to resume compliance with the JCPOA. He also continued by saying Washington's offer showed that Iran was in a position of strength, coming to them with the offer of no preconditions. And here's where it gets interesting. Iranian Foreign Minister Javad Zarif said that there was little chance these negotiations would take place. He said, quote, "It is not very likely because it's the continuation of the process of pressure. He is imposing pressure. This may work in the real estate market. It does not work with Iran." End quote.
Mm. Well,
Yeah.
notice also that the America's carrier groups are not technically in the Persian Gulf right now.
Yeah, they're just kind of hovering
Uh,
outside, and it's like,
yeah, they're actually more closer towards Pakistan and India than they are to Iran proper. They're not anywhere near really the Strait of Hormuz. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And you can see that Trump right now, he is employing another tactic, a soft tactic through the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. There is a certain level of respect between Iran and Japan, and it's kind of funny because obviously Shinzo Abe, he sort of has this same sort of personality type of Rouhani. He's intelligent, very kind, and has manners, sort of thing. And so Trump is sort of using his friendship that he gained with Shinzo to sort of leverage him to talk on his behalf to Iran. And they actually confirmed Iran and Japan are meeting, I believe, next week. It'll be the second time ever that the Japanese Prime Minister will be visiting Iran. And the first time that it happened, it was actually Shinzo Abe's father. And it was funny because in an interview, Shinzo Abe actually mentioned that his father told him that his visit to Iran was the one thing he wanted to do most as Prime Minister of Japan. So,
wow.
so I think for Shinzo, he's kind of maybe this is kind of an opportunity for him to, be like his dad, maybe try to be a sort of mediator between the U.S. and Iran. But it is kind of a positive sign in the sense that Trump probably realized like whatever I'm doing is not gonna fucking work.
well, I think we
Uh,
need to take away the more important fact is the fact that the Aryan Japanese alliance is back on.
Oh man, that's
the
exactly.
Aryan
That
anime,
was the thing I was gonna make. The Aryan Alliance is forming.
the Aryan Anime Alliance. Yeah, we're gonna have like Iranian DBZ characters just going Super Saiyan. But no, I think no. The reality of the situation is like Shinzo Abe is friends with Trump. They are close, and he is, sort of using this as an opportunity to sort of present himself in Japan as like these like really great mediators of conflicts, and I think that's a good position to be in for them. Um, Especially in light of, I don't know if you guys saw this, but Japan recently is going to increase its immigration
Oh
Yes,
yeah.
quotas. You guys
yes.
see that? So I don't know what's going on with that. I don't know if the cozying up with Trump coincides with that as well, but it remains to be seen for sure.
Oh, it's also tiresome.
So, unless
Alrighty.
either of you have any more comments on the Iran situation, I'm gonna move on to Syria.
Sure.
Yeah, let's do that.
Okay, so let's find the map for Syria and the key, of course. So, this is a brief update on Syria. The Syrian government offensive against HTS is back on after a ceasefire deal fell through on June 3rd. Now, this ceasefire, almost immediately as it was made, was broken by HTS and its allies. Now, according to pro-militant sources, at least 4 pieces of military equipment and over a dozen troops were killed in recent clashes. In turn, government-linked media claimed that 8 militants and 2 vehicles were destroyed. Israel also confirmed that the June 4th strike. Israel confirmed on June 4th that the strike on the T4 airbase over the weekend were carried out by the IAF. Now, this is the third Israeli strike on Syria in the last 10 days. And you recall there was about that month and a half between January and March where they took no action at all against Syria right before the election. Now, Syrian and Russian planes carried out more than 1,000 airstrikes on the Idlib province and its surroundings on June 5th today, according to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. So take it with a grain of salt. Now, this follows somewhat of a fall through in negotiations between Russia and Turkey in terms of de escalation. Now, in response to all of this, our wonderful president came out with a tweet that said, hearing word that Russia, Syria, and to a lesser extent Iran are bombing the hell out of Idlib province in Syria and indiscriminately killing many civilians. The world is watching this butchery. What is the purpose? What will it get you? Stop! All caps! Exclamation point.
Stop it, guys.
Yes.
But yeah, I mean, it's clear that the frustration with Idlib is that Syria and Russia are clearly just about to take it over. I mean, we've been saying they're about to
Yeah.
take it over for a long time. There hasn't been a infantry invasion of it yet. But the thing is that they've dwindled the terrorist numbers in Idlib. I mean, there's
Hmm.
just so many in there.
Every outlying village they take, it's barely a firefight. They accept the surrender conditions. They say, "Look, we'll put down our guns. Just spare us."
Hmm.
Right, and they retook Karbuta, so and four other villages around it. I mean, you know, I think the militants there, whether the Free Syrian Army, Al Sham, or whatever Turkish militant groups supported by Turkey, they're I think they understand this is the last stand for them, that there's nowhere else for them to go. So I would imagine that the fighting is going to be fierce. And yeah, so the losses for Syria are more than what I'd like to see. Of course, I wouldn't want to see any, but I imagine the fighting is going to be thick, and it's well, I don't know yet if I think whether Syria is intent on getting all of Idlib, but they're certainly intent on getting a huge chunk of it. I think they want the strategic points where Latakia is safe. Of course, Iran has infrastructure that's important to it, not just Russia, in Latakia and those areas where Idlib kind of swoops down southward. If they can cut that cone off, the amount of attacks that they can inflict on Syrian held territory is going to be dramatically reduced.
And Assad might just be playing the slow game, just
Yeah,
what's the point of rushing this sort of thing?
yeah.
And you can see that there's this general freak out around his strategy on Idlib because
Oh, I
the
know.
and like we were talking before the show, the Netanyahu and Trump want the focus. They know there's going to be war in Syria, but they want the war to take place kind of near Golan on the southern end,
Yeah, it's a
and they
bait.
yeah, and they kind of want Syria and Russia to give up on Idlib when there's no point in doing that, and there's really no point in fighting in the south, where Israel is actually winning. And
Hmm.
that's part of, and I think honestly the annexation of Golan might have been sort of like a bait, because
Yeah,
if you
yeah.
look at where Golan is and the population,
For
it's not
those
like
on
a
the
really
audience, the reference is that little blue part that's controlled by Israel on the map.
yeah, exactly, that part isn't like, there aren't that many Jewish settlers there. I mean
There's
that's
almost
mostly
none.
exactly, it's mostly just Syrians who are kind of caught up behind this fence. And so the annexation of Golan was, I feel like, just to bait Syria or Iran to do something down
Yeah,
south,
yeah.
because
It certainly was.
hold on Golan is nothing like Israel's hold on other parts.
I know. I mean, they effectively controlled it anyways before the war started.
Hmm.
I mean, this was merely a statement, and it was. I mean, it was a kind of a both a distraction and both a way, and not just a distraction intended to say compromise Syria, Iran, and Russia, but basically a distraction for people who might still be paying attention to the war in Syria.
Yeah, it was also an
And
election president, Netanyahu, who gave him that
yeah,
pre-election boost.
yeah, exactly. Guys, you know what we're gonna do? We're gonna say Golan is ours.
Yeah, and I actually didn't bring this up when it first happened, but I saw this. I don't know how this would play out because, of course, double standards and everything. But it's actually interesting since I saw some. I think it was actually South Front put out that Israeli annexation of the Golan Heights pretty much used the same pretext of the Russian annexation of Crimea, and it pretty much legitimizes it. If we're going to accept one, we have to accept the other.
Hmm.
Yeah, I
We
can
don't
totally
have to.
see that.
Yeah, but like I said, it of course the double standards apply. But looking at it from a
Mhm.
purely logical standpoint, it's interesting that these people who cheer on the annexation of Golan Heights, West Bank, whatever, treat Crimea as an act of aggression, a massive escalation. Just my personal observation.
Yeah, yeah,
All right,
yeah.
fellas, I'm gonna have to jump off real quick. I'm gonna have to jump off, but you guys finish up, and I'll catch everyone next
Oh,
week.
Perseus, before you go, I just wanted to let you know that I don't know if you know Constantine, but so the White Helmets in the new Call of Duty is a playable faction. Just that
I
I don't know
saw
if
the
you
trailer.
guys know that.
I saw the trailers for that, and you know what? Brzezinski.
I am stoked. I am stoked for this game. I bought 32 gigs of RAM just
What is
for
their like
those.
special ability? Fake chemical attack.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, that's ridiculous. Well, I look forward to seeing it. I mean, I want to see how the hell this plays out.
Yeah.
All right,
all
broskies. I'll see you later.
Okay, but talk to
Yeah.
you later.
all I can say about that is, with that level of fusion between politics and entertainment, Brzezinski would be proud.
I know. Call of Duty. Oh my god, it's so lame. It's literally a Soros video game now.
Well, yeah, you'll remember the early ones was all about killing Russians, and it's funny because back when like the woke sort of videos, like the AJ Plus, all those kind of things just going off on a tangent, they talked about like, oh, it's Islamophobic, they have you kill Muslims. Like most of the games are focused around killing Russians, so you want to talk about what's being propagandized? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But let's move on to. I know you'll definitely have some thoughts about this subject, Kosovo. So this is actually a bit
Hmm.
of old news. We missed it last week because of the chaos of the European elections. But on May 28th, Kosovo's police's Regional Operations Support Unit, ROSU for short, carried out mass raids on areas and compact settlements of Serbs in the northwest part of Kosovo. Now, the ROSU units, reportedly supported by over 70 vehicles, detained more than a dozen ethnic Serbs, mostly people of influence in local communities. Now, Rosu also briefly detained and beat a Russian member of the UN Interim Administration mission to Kosovo. Now, the area they targeted, the population is about 90% Serbian, who refuse to see themselves as part of Kosovo. Now, in response to this, the Serbian army moved vehicles and troops from a region in central Serbia to the border, according to the official state news agency.
Yeah, and I mean, there's several things that are being said by Vucic and by the Russians. So, I mean, it's a very difficult situation because, of course, Kosovo is very important to the Serbian identity. It is part of their logos, is their own mini civilization, and one of the ways that Kosovo is used to demoralize Serbia is by having it occupied. And that's what this tactic was, essentially. Now, there is a story about an individual named Zoran Djorkic, who is accused of being a war criminal and so on. But I don't, that might be true, but I find it very suspect that they've rounded up these ethnic Serbs in Kosovo. Based on what charges? I think this was a provocation, and who knows? There might be elements, within American deep state and within NATO that would like to see a war begin there because it would overextend Russia. In the same way that Russia was occupied with Chechnya and could not come to aid Serbia in any meaningful way. However, statements have been made that Russia would support Vucic, would support Serbia. Now, how far is this going to go? I don't yet know. My guess is that at this moment there probably isn't. It probably won't flare up into a war. The reason being, first and foremost, it would already destabilize what's become like one of the most impoverished regions of Eastern Europe. Another is that Europe itself, it's not the Europe of the 90s, it's the Europe of the post 2000s. So I think Europeans especially Western Europeans, have made the link that war causes refugees and refugees cause disturbance. And um, so I don't see it happening right away. I don't discount it, but I think I favor. I'm going to err on the side of saying that it won't happen.
I would agree, and my thoughts on this honestly is, you had for a while there, especially throughout the 2010s, Serbia is finally going to kiss the ring. They're going to join the European Union. They're going to join NATO. They're going to be grafted into the liberal international order. They're going to be pulled into a part of this. And for a while there, actually up until recently, I thought that was going to happen. I thought with the recent push, they were finally going to get them in the European Union and NATO. But things stalled out. The Serbians dragged their heels. So my thought on it is, they're doing this not necessarily to try to provoke Serbia into any military action. But I'm sure they have a plan if that happens, but
Mm-hmm.
just to degrade them even further, just to demoralize them any further
Yeah,
until they finally accept Brussels as their overlords.
right. And we've discussed on this show before that, in fact, I believe that the bigger picture around integration of Montenegro and Macedonia was also to demoralize Serbia. It, I'm not equating that that's the same thing as Kosovo. However, it's not something to rule out, uh, primarily because historically both those regions have had very strong ties with Serbia. Generally, relations have been excellent. Of course, Montenegro used to belong to Serbia, and essentially it isolates Serbia. And I think that's what this is. I agree with you. This is a provocation. Is there to demoralize Serbians even more?
Now, what I also find interesting about this is, Vucic, or the president's name, uh,
Vucic,
Vucic, but I don't know
Vucic.
Vucic. Serbian lessons here on the War Report, but I don't know where he really stands. Whether he stands like, since again he's done some things like, oh, he's gonna kiss the ring, but the one I'm really concerned about, I can't remember her name, but that lesbian prime minister they have now is not a good figure in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, I hear you.
But overall, I don't expect much to flare up there. Of course, the uh, Kosovo, they're talking about turning their security force into a full-fledged military, because pretty much since the existence of Kosovo, it's been protected by, you guessed it, U.S. troops. So it'll be, definitely keep your eye on it. There's not much happening now, but this flare-up definitely is concerning, and it's even like, look, I'm not surprised that they happened, that they did this to ethnic Serbs. No surprise there, but the fact that they not only attacked a Russian, but a Russian UN official really caught me off guard.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, it has it's been generally, over several difficult decades for Serbia. Um, Vucic has come out in parliament and said that Serbia has to accept that they have lost Kosovo, and I think that's for them that's very difficult. That's their heartland, or was.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Now let's move on to a bit more of a, I guess you could say, joyous subject. At least there's a few laughs in there. Trump's visit to the UK. So over the past few days, hold on. Over the past few days, Donald Trump went on a state visit to the UK, and of course now today is in Ireland. Now this will culminate with his visit to France tomorrow for, of course, the D-Day anniversary. But the first day of his visit was spent with outgoing Prime Minister Theresa May discussing mainly Brexit, but most of it was spent with the royal family and doing more ceremonial events and more of the hand waving and shaking hands and the camera sort of stuff. Now, more eventful than Trump's actual visit were the protests against him. So let's pull up this one thing I had here. So what you see here is some protest group decided, oh, we're going to really get to Trump by showing the fact that 72% of the UK population approved of Obama, while only 21% approves of Trump, because I'm sure Trump cares so much about what the British population thinks of him. So, of course, the baby balloon reappeared, and somebody actually popped it. I don't know who, but it's just it's funny because that thing was just they kept on running with it and running with them, and yeah, but just more humorous than anything. So yeah, as I said, upon Trump's arrival, they projected the image of his approval rating compared to Obama's. Now, if you ask me, these protests were peak neoliberalism, especially considering the fact, and pretty much everything but rhetoric, and even still to that, Trump has kissed the ring. He's become exactly like Bush, exactly like Obama, and he's really no different
Mhm.
besides the fact that he'll swear sometimes in a tweet and go off on a little bit of a ramble, but ultimately beyond that, there's not much to it.
I find it amazing that, I mean, of course, I think the only way you can look at Trump, the Trump phenomenon, and I mean, in the way that it seems to so emotionally affect liberals, because, of course, for me, when I look at, you know, what's happening, generally speaking, with the MAGA peds and Trump, this is just, this is a war between neoliberalism versus liberalism, or neoliberalism with a capital N and lowercase neoliberalism, right? But Trump, for leftists, I think represents something, a male that's just literally too heterosexual, and I think they find that disturbing. He's literally too heterosexual for the job. I mean, that's how far things have gotten. Because I mean, statements such as "we're going to decriminalize homosexuality all around the globe," that's going to be our mission. Make zero effect on them. There's nothing. I know a lot of this, of course, stems with some of the things that Trump said during his campaign and whatnot, and more of it has to deal with, like, the kind of supporters that are for Trump. Well, I think his most fervent supporters are actually gone, or but yeah, it is hilarious to watch, especially because the crowds at one point were supposed to be 250,000, and it did not look like 250,000 showed up to protest.
Yeah, and Trump was talking about how there were thousands of people waving the American and British flags just out to greet him and wave to him. So you had that, but I do agree with your point. Even though he's pretty much agreed with them on everything that matters, the fact that he's a loudmouth white dude who has a different mistress every night is what really gets them.
Yeah, I mean, you could be describing Clinton as well in that, but
Well, yeah, they pretty much thrown him under the bus too. He's just a bit more soft spoken with the. He's just a good old Southern boy, that kind of act. But yeah, I
yeah.
get what you're saying. So when it comes to Trump's visit to Ireland, this was actually a bit of an interesting thing. So Trump met with Irish Prime Minister Leo Varadkar, who is, keep in mind, a half Indian homosexual. Now, their discussion focused mainly around the post-Brexit Irish border. Now, Trump said, quote, the way it works now, it was good, and I think you need to try to keep it that way. And I know there's a big point of contention with respect to Brexit is your border. So I almost say, like I said, despite the fact that Trump has pretty much kissed the ring and everything, he still has that demeanor, like as we said, for better or for worse. I'm almost wondering if the British asked them, like, can you go tell the Irish this on our behalf?
Oh, right. Yes. Um, yeah, and actually, we should mention also, because I think we've sort of batted around the idea that Trump, or Trump's team might be interested in a Brexit, right? Because
Yeah, because it fractures, it isolates the UK from Europe, which makes them more susceptible to American influence, specifically economically.
right, and I think that's what he was getting at. We're going to have an amazing trade deal. Of course, it also isolates, the Central European powers, or the Western, the French and the Germans, right? So I would say that, Trump's faction, say, as opposed to Obama's faction, um, want this kind of balkanization of the EU, if you will, this wresting of Britain from the EU. However, I don't think that they're actually interested, say, in other countries leaving the EU. I would say Britain is probably their limit.
I would say so too. I think Trump, for all his faults, I think he's still real. Like I said, I think a lot of his failures, especially in foreign policy, goes around to the people surrounding him. And look, he probably wants the Anglo-American sphere and is content with a continental European, French, German sphere, maybe some break-offs in some of the more populous regions of Europe, or whatever. But again, I think he's, despite everything, he still has the foresight to see the direction things are going. And I don't think he has any interest in trying to break off France or Germany into this new, I guess you'd say, block he's trying to build.
Hmm. Yeah, but myself, I'm not too aware. Besides the border issue in Ireland, I don't know too much else that's going on with his visit to Ireland, other than that.
Well, it was pretty much just, oh, we'll tack that on because I'm going to be here anyway. So I imagine he'd probably did it on behalf of the British. Now, Trump, continuing on the border issue, rejected the suggestion that Brexit would be bad for Ireland, saying, quote, I think it will be good. The big thing is going to be your border, but hopefully that is going to work out, and I think it will work out, he said. So pretty much the typical Trump, where he dodges the question, talks vaguely about it, sort of the politician thing, but granted, that's beside the point. Now, all things
Hmm.
considered, with these two personalities, with what you'd expect, the meeting was relatively warm. It didn't seem contentious like maybe some of Trump's earlier meetings with Merkel or Macron, where it's very. You'll remember the G7 summit last year with sort of like the split room
Yeah.
with Trump, the Italian Prime Minister, and Abe with Merkel, Macron, and May on the other side. It wasn't like that. It was a relatively warm meeting. It seemed like things went over well. Probably, I mean, again, so I just thought it was like
He
more.
didn't throw Skittles at anybody.
No, he did. He did not. He did not. He did not take the starburst and say, "Don't say I ever gave you anything." What happened to those kind of stories? You ever notice there's been like a sharp decline in those kind of stories?
I know, I know. I will never disrespect them for that. I will.
Yeah,
Oh, that was so
credit where
good.
credit is due. That's all I can say. So,
Yeah.
moving on from that, let's finish out with this last story. So, U.S. and Mexican officials have officially entered the negotiations over issues involving trade in the border. Now, this comes after Trump's threat last week that he will impose a 5% tariff on Mexican goods on June 10th to pressure the government of Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador to block Central American migrants from crossing the border into the U.S. Trump said the import tax on all goods will increase 5% every month through October, topping out at 25%. Now, of course, the economists, the business groups are alarmed by this. It cuts in their bottom line, saying this will hike the cost of many Mexican goods. We might not be able to get our avocado toast, and it'll be so sad because Orange Hitler is stopping me from getting my quesadilla from Taco Bell or whatever. But I do have to say this: with we were talking at the beginning of the show, at the top of the show, how intertwined the U.S. Chinese economy are. Now, there's a
Mhm.
similar existence between the U.S. and the Mexican economy. I wouldn't say it's nearly to the same degree, but it's still heavily intertwined. I agree with this move. I
Yeah.
agree we need to be putting a lot more pressure on Mexico. Again, we don't give them. Iran says mean things to Israel. We have a carrier group in the Gulf. Mexico is letting migrants flood across the border, and we give them a year warning. You recall that about, I don't know, like almost a month ago at this point. And so I have to say, I don't necessarily oppose this because I doubt it's going to come to that. Obrador was pretty open to trade talks. He said at one of these press conferences he was at, I'm confident that we can make a deal. So, out of all of Trump's blunders and failures as of late, he might get one victory out of this when it comes to Mexico. He might be able to actually get them, at least temporarily, since I doubt it'll hold over. They'll probably go back on their word. But if he can get just, I don't know, a few months, half a year of them actually cracking down on Central American migration, I would say that's a victory in and of itself.
Right. I don't know how, incentives rather than, an incentive is one thing, a punishment is another.
Yeah, the stick instead of the
Um,
carrot kind of thing.
yeah. How well is this going to work? Of course, I hope it does, but to me, it sounds like there's a potential, like Mexico could retaliate. Because Mexico, of course, is not fond of Trump at all. And I don't think they're serious whatsoever about containing the flow of migrants.
Well, yeah,
I
because if they do, they stay in Mexico. Then I mean, if, from the position of a Mexican, I don't blame them at all. It's either we can have them all stay here, or we can just send them north.
Right, of course, but I meant like say to play a greater role as a partner to the U.S. Right, at
Yes.
having a stopgap on its southern border, in order to force migrants to find other means, literally, than walking through Mexico. Um, in a way, it was too antagonistic from the start with Trump because he was a touchstone, for the kind of frustration that a lot of Americans were feeling. And it was this kind of, we're going to punish you until you listen and do what we say, and so on. And that, in retrospect now, that has, probably done a disservice to having Mexico as a bigger ally, a bigger partner. But by the same token, Mexico has enjoyed an increase in wealth um, over the last few decades, with many, many Western companies moving there for manufacturing.
Yes. Now,
So,
actually, picking up on what you
not
said with Trump taking the aggressive stance, I agree with you to a degree, but I think these past 2 years, almost 2.5 years of Trump's presidency, where he can't even get the Republican Party, his own party, to make a
yeah,
deal with him, it destroyed a lot of his credibility both at home and abroad. Maybe if Trump went into this with some successes, with some border construction, with some sort of deal in Congress, some legislative achievements, he may have more ground to stand on. They may think, oh yeah, this guy's a negotiator. He can actually get things done. But I think using this aggressive act that he's been using for the past 2 years, with the little results it's yielded, it's killed a lot of his credibility. And I think now is the time, unfortunately, to
hmm
move to where we have to start sweetening the pot. We need to say, the Mexicans are going to say what's in it for us, and we need to tell them what's in it for them instead of threatening punishment. But we've worked ourselves in, of course, this awkward situation. And a lot of it's
yeah,
Trump's fault, but a lot of it is the fault of those surrounding him. But again, trying to point fingers at, again, past events. It's just a waste of time at this point. But it is ultimately frustrating, and I would say out of this move, I tepidly support it. But as I said, there needs to be some sort of, and maybe this will happen as negotiations continue throughout this week. There needs to be some sort of sweetening of the pot. We need to make Mexico an offer that shows it's actually to their benefit to cooperate with us on this issue.
right, yeah, yeah. I couldn't agree more.
But with that out of the way, it was a bit of a slow news week. I apparently left the UK graphic up a bit longer than I intended to, but that's okay. You get a look at here. Let's pull it back up. Obama's nice smiling face. Trump's all scowl with the 21% under him. Just the typical thing
That's
you'd
what the wall
expect.
should look like.
Yeah,
That's what the wall should look like. Like that statistic should be facing Mexico. Like it's a kind of really subversive own. Like I know you don't like me, but
no, not a bad idea. Just plaster that on the wall. But with that being said, like I said, a bit of a slow week. This is the first time in a while we actually have an episode under an hour. So we'll see you guys next time, and goodbye.
thanks, guys.